Well, good morning again, everybody. So glad you're here today. My name is Joel Adorman. I'm the lead pastor. Happy Mother's Day, moms, whether you are in-house or watching online. For those of you, moms or not, that are watching online, we want to give a special welcome to you. We know a lot of folks will check us out there before ever joining us here. So while we're so glad you're there and are so thankful you're with us, we will be so excited when we actually get to see you eyeball to eyeball. But thanks for joining us. Now, I need to give you fair warning that what I'm about to talk about is controversial. What I'm going to say for the next 20 minutes or so is not popular. And it comes with a trigger warning. Because what I'm about to say would get me banned on social media. Because we're going to talk about the uniqueness of women. Now, you might think, now, why would that get you banned? Because of things like this. I know that there are some things that make a woman and some things that make a man a man. Strange thing. Funny story. No matter what I do, no matter what medications I take, no matter what surgeries I go through, dig up my bones in 1,000 years and they're going to go, that was a man. They won't know my name. But I am a man down to my DNA. And that means a woman is a woman down to her DNA. So as Christians, we are people of the book. We are people of the Bible. We believe what we've been talking about in our series that we took a break from today. But in this message series we've been in, we've looked at parts in Genesis that tell us that God created men and women and made them that way on purpose. And that He didn't make them accidentally. It was intentional. That a woman has something very unique about her. And so we like to take this opportunity on Mother's Day to highlight those things that make women so unique. Now, motherhood is the most obvious expression of that. No matter what I do, I will never give birth to a baby. Ever. And I'm so glad we guys don't have to, because the human race would stop the first time we did it. We would never do it again. And you women have a bunch of different kids. Yes, we can give some thanks for that one. Because if it was up to men, there would be no more humans. It would stop. We're wimps, okay? We're just really honest. We got a paper cut and we're like, oh, I can't go to work the next day. I don't know what I'm going to do. Women are like tough as nails. That's the truth. But, it's a strange thing because of what's going on in our culture. It's actually women that get attacked. It's women that get erased. It's the uniqueness of women that get erased from their sports to even motherhood. I mean, I'm watching on social media and I'm watching this craziness going on. I'm sorry. If you disagree with me, I respectfully tell you I disagree with you. But this craziness of saying, well, today shouldn't be called Mother's Day. It should be called Birthing Persons Day. I'm going to help you out today. If you are capable of giving birth to another human being, you're a woman. And we're thankful that you're that way. We know you're not a man, and we're glad for that. I'm not trying to make light of people that truly have gender dysmorphia issues and struggle. It must be terrible to struggle with your own gender identity. That must be horrifying. And I can't imagine that. But we're just saying that we're not trying to erase the uniqueness of women. We're trying to celebrate the uniqueness of women. And we're grateful for that. And the Bible celebrates that. But believe it or not, we're not even the first people that have tried to change this definition and this idea of what being a woman means. God created men and women perfectly and created this perfect relationship, and then sin messed it up. Genesis chapter 3, we talked about that last week in our message series, and how sin messed it up, and it messed up even what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And then we come along today and we're talking about Mother's Day, and for some this is a terrible day because you had terrible mothers, and they were monsters. And for some of you, you want children so desperately, and life hasn't worked out that way. And like we said at the blessing at the beginning, we mourn with you that it hasn't turned out that way. And this day breaks your heart. And as much as you try to focus on the blessing of your own mom, today is a day that stings you in the heart. And as a man, I will never understand that. I'm a man. I will never feel what it's like to carry life inside of me. I will never have this spiritual, biological connection to the next generation of humans. God didn't make me that way. He made you ladies that way. He made you so wonderful, and He gave you such incredible gifts that we're celebrating today. We're going to talk about that in the message today, and we're going to talk about some really good news for you ladies. And that is, when it comes to motherhood, perfection is not required. Perfection is one of those expectations society puts on women, that they have to be good at being an employee, or maybe as an employer, and they have to be good at being perfect at being a mother, and then they need to be a perfect sister and a perfect daughter and a perfect friend. And the Bible never says perfection is the requirement on you. We're in the book of 1 Samuel to talk about that. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. It's page 183 in the Pew Bible there in front of you, 183. It's 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20. And if you don't own a print Bible of your own and you'd like one, please keep this. We will think nothing of it if you walk out with it under your arm. We would love that. And if you are taking it just to give to somebody else, that's wonderful too. If you want to give it to somebody, a neighbor, a friend, coworker, take them. We have plenty, and this is a great thing for us to give out, right? So 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 1 through 20, and we're going to look at the first 16 verses of this to get an idea what's happening here with this woman named Hannah. I love the story of Hannah. It says this: there was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. One was called Hannah and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came from Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah, he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband, Elkanah, would say to her, "Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons?" Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest had been on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, but her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, "How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine." "Not so, my lord," Hannah replied. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." See, these expectations of perfections come from obvious and surprising places. Now, you have this second wife situation, which is an issue in and of itself. But she is the one person who probably should have been the most sympathetic on Hannah. But she wasn't. I mean, she prodded her and poked at her and just made fun of her. And like, "Oh, you don't even have children at all, and I have all these sons, and I have all these daughters." And so she had to deal with this year after year, because her society told her that the only value she had was giving birth to children, specifically sons, because that's what kept the family lineage going. So she feels like a failure. The one woman who should understand this just makes fun of her horribly. Her husband, Elkanah, who probably means well, I mean, we guys can sympathize with this. I think he means well, but he actually makes her feel guilty about not being content and says, "Why are you downcast? Why have you lost your appetite? Don't I mean more than 10 sons? Now, the scripture tells us that he loved Hannah. Now, believe it or not, it wasn't always required that husbands love their wives emotionally. It was required they provided for them, but not necessarily have those emotions. He had those emotions. He loved her tremendously. You're going to see more of that later in the story. But he's saying, "Aren't I enough?" And of course, she had her husband, that was good, but that wasn't her heart's desire. Her heart was breaking, and her husband didn't understand. And then when she goes and prays to the Lord, and so she goes to the house of the Lord and she's praying, the priest Eli thinks she's a drunk. And he's just like, "Hey, don't come in here drunk, stop drinking." And she's like, "I'm not drunk." I do wonder if she's added any words to that, because that really had to just set her off. She corrects him and says, I'm in anguish, and I am pouring out my heart to the Lord, and my grief I'm pouring out to the Lord. And Eli should have been the one guy to understand this in the whole equation, because that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go to the Lord when we're anguished and grieved, and this priest is like missing it by a country mile. So the expectations of perfection to Hannah came from some obvious spots and very surprising areas. But after she corrects Eli and he kind of gets his head screwed on straight, we see what happens next in verses 17 and 18. Look, he recovers well. He says, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." And she says, "May your servant find favor in your eyes." Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Now, there's a sharp contrast sometimes, or most of the time, all the time, I guess, between the spiritually dull and the spiritually bright. Eli was an acceptable priest, but he was pretty dull spiritually. I mean, again, remember, he thought she was drunk, and that's why she was moving her lips and nothing was coming out. She corrects him, and then he finally goes, "Okay, you're right. Okay, then he gives this blessing to her, but it's at that point that Hannah kind of turns it all around because she's spiritually bright. She gets this spiritual. She'd gone to the Lord, and now when she receives this blessing, she realizes that symbolically, this is the Lord's way of telling her, "Hannah, it's going to be all right." Now, Hannah's name means woman of grace or woman of favor. So when she says to Eli, "May I find favor in your sight," she's actually using a form of her own name. She's saying, "May you see Hannah in me. May there be Hannah found in me. May there be grace and favor found in me." And this woman is formidable. She's a tough cookie because she's taking all of this and she still turns to the Lord in that grief. And then she's not holding a baby boy at this point. We're not to that. Don't get ahead of me on the story. She's got nothing but her faith. But that was enough. And she walked off in this triumphantly leaving with her head held high, knowing that the Lord had her back. The spiritual victory was already won for Hannah. And yet she didn't actually have anything yet. But she did know the Lord was with her. I mean, Hannah is incredible. And if the story stopped there, we could learn a ton from her. But then we have to go on to the last part of the story, verses 19 and 20. Early the next morning, they arose and worshiped before the Lord and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah, her husband, made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." So now the spiritual victory becomes a physical reality. Now she finally gets the rest of the story. But she had already experienced it. I mean, you could see that emotionally and spiritually. She already said, "Okay, the Lord's got this, and I simply trust him to work this out." And then she did become pregnant, and she did give birth to this son. Now, very often the Lord uses people to accomplish his ends. That really shouldn't surprise us. That's how he works most of the time, because the God who has ordained the end of the story has also ordained all the pieces in the middle to get us there. And we often find whenever the Lord brings about that victory we've been praying for, we find that there's all these breadcrumbs along the way where God has used these people in our lives to get us there. So the Lord didn't do this, Mary, immaculate conception type thing where she just becomes pregnant. He used her husband to do it. But that didn't make it any less of the Lord remembering her, and that's pointed out to us in the story. The Lord did this for her because she asked. And so then, when she gives birth to this boy, we have this little phrasing that just says she named him Samuel. Now, in our Western ears, we don't think much of that. But in the culture she's in, women didn't name children. The husbands did. And they usually named them after a family name, like the story began with a lineage. They usually give a family name to that son, especially, this was Hannah. This was the wife that Elkanah loved tremendously, giving her a double portion. But it even says something about how much he loved Hannah because he let her name him. But also, I wonder if Elkanah figured out this was Hannah's miracle. This was what Hannah had been praying for, because Elkanah's name was actually fine through Peninnah and her sons. His name was fine. The family line was in no danger. But Hannah had received this blessing, and so she has the honor of now naming it, and names him a name completely out of the family. But she named him Samuel. And the name Samuel sounds like the Hebrew word that means heard from God. So whenever she would say his name, or whenever anyone else would say the name Samuel, they would hear a word that sounds very similar to heard from God. That God heard and God delivered and God did these things. Now, Hannah had to do something maybe even harder than the prayer, because in time she did dedicate Samuel to the Lord, literally left him there. And he would be the prophet Samuel who anointed the kings of Israel and was one of the greatest prophets in the Old Testament. And this was Hannah's boy. Hannah was this woman who everything in her society told her she was a failure. Everything in her society told her she was sinful because they thought the only reason she didn't have children was because she was a sinner and that she was outcast from the grace of God. And yet her name meant woman of grace, woman of favor. And they considered her out of favor because that's why she didn't have children. But no matter how much they tried to crush her, she just leaned into the Lord even more. But she teaches the ladies a very powerful lesson about grit and about grace. Because success as a mother is not based on what society tells you. It's based on surrendering to the Lord. That's what Hannah tells us. That's what we see. That her success as a mom wasn't because of what society told her or she would have given up long before. She certainly wouldn't have fulfilled that vow and given them to the Lord because that made no sense. That was not what society would have said, but instead she surrenders to the Lord and says, I made this vow, I trusted you, now I will literally give Samuel to you. It's not like a parent-child dedication where the parents walked away with them. When she dedicated Samuel, she left him and she walked away with nothing. But she knew there was something bigger going on than just her. See what I mean about grit and grace? This woman was incredible. She was remarkable in her faith. More than a footnote in the story of Samuel, he wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her faith and her grace and the favor that God showed her. Because she wouldn't listen to just what society told her, because society would have told her to give up, and she didn't. Society would have erased her own existence because she didn't have children, but she surrendered to the Lord. Into the New Testament, we find a very similar idea, although it's said in a way that we're not as familiar with. It's a little veiled in its understanding, but you have the Apostle Paul talking to his young protege, Timothy. First century now, so we fast forward a lot of years. First century, and he says this to Timothy. He says, but women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. You say, Joel, how in the world did that just validate what you just said? Because we're hearing this with Western ears. You've got to think like a Jewish man talking to a Gentile man in a Gentile world in the first century. Okay, he's not saying that a woman is going to obtain salvation and entry into heaven because she has children. Although I have heard many mothers tell me that having children has brought them closer to God because it's only God that kept them from killing us. My mother could probably testify to that. 3 sons, we were all boys, even our dogs were boys. The only reason that woman survived us is because the grace of God was in her life. Or shall I say, the only reason we survived her was because of the grace of God in her life. So what Paul is saying there is not only this the sanctification process in a woman's life when she has to be a mother. It's bigger than that. He's using a shorthand for all those things associated with the Christian home that a woman brings to the equation. And he's saying, yes, childbearing is part of that, but the fact that what women bring to the home is so unique and so special that men can't do it. And he's saying that as a woman does this, she's finding her greatest joy and her greatest satisfaction, not in what society is telling her she's got to be and what society is telling her she's got to do, but instead, Paul is telling Timothy, she's going to find her greatest joy in surrendering to the Lord and living out a life that is called to something far, far bigger. I mean, it really is true. The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. That the greatest legacy a woman can leave is the next generation. Many a sinner has been prayed into heaven at the knee of a praying mother. And I am one of them. I mean, my mother is the one that sat me on her lap and led me to Jesus. I mean, that's some of your stories too, where it's been maybe a spiritual mom that has taken you under her wing and said, nuh-uh, you are not doing a smart thing. Come this way. That's what a woman gets to do. What we sometimes will call women's intuition, this is so cool. Did you know that is actually a biological function of your brain, ladies? That God actually made your brain that way? The joke, the kind of tacky joke that we'll say about how you can remember something from 10 years ago, God made you that way. It's why you can walk into a room and size up a room within seconds and go, they're trouble. They're trouble. That one's good. How can women do that? God made you that way. My brain doesn't do that. I compartmentalize in my brain. I have a nothing box. I can sit there and stare out the window and do nothing. And wipe the drool from my chin. Women don't have a nothing box. Everything in their head is always swirling, isn't it, ladies? It's always connecting. You're always putting pieces together. You're always seeing this and connecting that to something else you know. That is a gift. And a curse sometimes too, I get it, okay? But it's a gift because God made you that way. It's the reason that mothers will yell out the window, "Stop doing that, you're going to break your neck." And they hadn't seen anything. They know it. They feel it. They have put the pieces together somewhere in their head, and that little computer is working like crazy, and they know. It's why mothers have eyes in the back of their head. God made you that way, and He made you special. Another cool thing with women, wrap your head around this. If you are a mother who has given birth to a daughter, you have carried your grandchildren. Think about it. If you're a mother, okay, a woman who's given birth to a girl, you have carried your grandchildren while you were carrying your daughter. Because your daughter is born with all the eggs she will ever have. And you carried the seed of your grandchildren with you. Men don't do that. Women do that. One of the most frustrating things to me as a man is that we are in a culture trying to erase the uniqueness of women. And it is to our great detriment. It is tragic that it's not men getting erased in this weird equation. It's women. It's the uniqueness of what they bring to the table, which is why we, as men and women, need to support the uniqueness of women. I told you, this was controversial. There's a chance we won't even get to put this on some of our social media platforms once the closed captioning pops in and some of the words I'm saying are figured out by the algorithms. And that's just reality that we live in. But this is what we need to do as a church, whereas you moms, you are our heroes. Whether you are a biological mom, whether you are a foster mom, maybe you are a stepmom. And that was one word I left off of here, and I apologize for that, ladies. You stepmoms are so special, and I apologize. I left that word off. That's my fault. So just insert that in there because you are our heroes as well. Biological moms, stepmoms, foster moms, spiritual moms. There is a lady in the life of my wife and I that is a spiritual mom, and her name is Peggy Britt. She is a spiritual mom to us. Never underestimate being a spiritual mother to someone else. Ladies, that is a gift you bring to us as men and women. You are our heroes for that. But also as a church, we want to make sure that we come alongside mothers and support them and champion them and help them succeed. Not as society would say that, but as the Lord would call us to do that. We want that for men too, but that's coming up on Father's Day. We talk about that, okay? We're talking to the ladies here, so we guys, we're going to come alongside you today and help you succeed and help you champion what you do. That means, guys, it doesn't just need to be women standing up for women's sports. We need to do that too. We need to stand up for that and say, no, they need to have their sports. They need to, because they're different, and they need to have that. They need to have access to those scholarships. We need to do that too. Men, don't believe the lie that you can't have an opinion just because you're a guy. Because if you have the right opinion, you're allowed to say that. So state your wrong opinion by the culture. Guys, we can't leave the women hanging on these issues. Okay? We can't leave them hanging on these issues. This last week with this Supreme Court leak and the what looks like Roe v. Wade may get overturned and sent back to the states, we need to be excited about that and champion that. We need to stand beside these women. We need to make sure that these women know when they face unplanned pregnancies, like we said in that blessing, we got to come alongside them. It's our joy and our honor to come alongside women, no matter the pregnancy. We celebrate that. We rejoice in that because that is something so uniquely feminine, and it's beautiful. See, society tells you, ladies, you got to be all kinds of stuff, and perfect is one of them. But Jesus never said that about you. He never said perfection was required for you. What he said was that society doesn't dictate who and what you are, but you're going to find your success as a mom by surrendering to the Lord. So on behalf of all of us, men and women, celebrating those biological stepmom, foster moms, spiritual moms, from the bottom of our hearts, happy Mother's Day. And we're so thankful for you.